Hello and welcome to the Season 4 premiere of Everybody Hates Your Brand. It's been a while, but we're back with more podcast shenanigans. So yeah, we're back. Season 4 starts here, and we start with a cracking episode. Today, we're going to be chatting to Susan Rose. Susan is an expert in customer-centric retail strategy and in customer behavioural segmentation. She's worked in this field for over 30 years since joining Dunnhumby in 91. For those of you who probably heard of Dunnhumby. She was part of the team that developed and launched the highly acclaimed Tesco Clubcard loyalty program, and founded their insight department and developed some world-renowned retail analytics solutions during the 90s. Since then, she's founded multiple businesses, including Retail Analytics Specialist 5.1, where she took the role of Customer Strategy Director, and which is where we met whilst I was working at Game. She's also launched Zinc, Keystone Consulting, and most recently Science of Shopping, where, and I quote, they fuse customer-centric know-how with software innovation to deliver accessible solutions that drive and support the decision-making processes for your business to enable change. In short, she's smart and experienced and definitely worth the next 40 minutes of your time to listen to. I hope you enjoy the interview. So, as I said in the intro, it gives me great pleasure to welcome a new guest to the podcast to kick off season 4. And I'd like to say welcome to the podcast to Susan Rose. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's lovely to be here.
It's a delight to have you. Thank you for joining us. We start every interview with a little section up front because we have listeners from all around the world. What I call the credibility section, which is just for you to introduce yourself and your career, what you do, your history, and all that kind of stuff. So if you could give us a little rundown of who you are and where you've been and what you've done, that would be great.
All right. So I have been working in the customer insight space for around 30 years. I was extremely lucky early in my career and worked with some incredible retailers like Tesco, who were doing some pretty impressive stuff at the time, launching loyalty programs and really breaking the boundaries of what you could do with data in business. And I focused all of those years in understanding customer behavior. So what I'm all about is what customers actually do, how they transact with your business and what that means about the health of your business and the trading relationships you have with customers. So it's big data, it's factual, it's not very fluffy, but I think it's very interesting.
So you've started lots of businesses over those 30 years and done some amazing things. And this chat actually came about because of an article I wrote, which I will link in the show notes, but it was about the idiocy of using generations like Gen Z or millennials as marketing segments, treating them as marketing segments. And you kindly commented and you said, and I quote, "It would be great to bounce around why businesses don't use their data well, even the basic data, let alone segmentation." And that sparked an idea in my brain of that's enough to suggest a podcast where we maybe discuss that very topic. So let's jump in on that exact point. Could you sort of expand on what you mean by why businesses don't use their data well? What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess the remark came from thinking about some of the marketing we received. So it was quite a flippant remark in a way, which was very, very often we open our inbox and we are inundated with messages from businesses that act as if they don't know us at all, even though we've been trading with them for many years. So I have this kind of passion, which is, before you ask me to do something, remember who I am. So if I think about it, I've worked with retailers in lots of different retail sectors, from grocery to budget department stores to premium department stores to luxury brands like Chloe. And all of our clients had one thing in common, which was, who are our customers and help us remember them better. And then you open up your inbox and someone says, "Dear valued customer," not even using your name, we noticed you were looking at this dress. Would you like to buy it now? It's half price. And you're like, "Yeah, I bought that dress last month. I haven't worn it yet, so thanks for that." And I think that was the example that I kind of bounced back to you with, to say, come on, we've got to be able to do better than this. And I thought about what we used to do, because I've been doing this for so long, and I think about how hard we used to work when we were actually putting envelopes on people's doorsteps which cost £2 or £2.50 each to land in front of the customer, and how very, very hard we worked to make sure we were putting them in front of the right people. And I do think a lot of it now is just, I can, so I will send everything to everyone. And I think it makes brands look a bit stupid, to be frank.
I've said many times, and even on this podcast, that I am glad that I came up in the world of direct mail first, because as you said, or even when I was working in call centers, in Vodafone days, expensive. So get it right. And I think that level of discipline, you're absolutely right, has been lost. And the ability to really focus on who you're talking to, what you want them to do, how you make that as easy as possible. And think you're right. It's gone a bit, well, we could just send it to everybody. It's not going to cost that much. Let's just do that,
I had quite a funny experience. It's the company is Sweaty Betty. They've been around for 25 years, and I think I've been shopping with them for nearly 25 years. I remember the store in Chiswick before they had own brand and all the rest of it. So I had an email from them a few months ago, and it said at the bottom of the email, if there's anything you'd like to tell us about Sweaty Betty, reply to this email and give us your opinion. So I thought, God, that's cool. What a great idea. So I imagined in my naivety that it would go to a different response from their regular customer service team, when you responded to this email with your opinion.
Yeah.
So I sent them a little email saying a few opinions. And one of the things I said was, I'm not sure you're really a gym brand. All the girls in my gym wear Sweaty Betty leggings, but they don't buy your tops. Maybe this is an opportunity. So anyway, the first thing came, and then the other thing I said was, please don't send me a New Year resolution email saying, are you struggling to exercise when I've been buying workout gear from you for 20 years? I got a response from their customer service team that said, you have to understand that we have thousands of customers and we can't possibly go back to them each with an individual set of products that are relevant to them. And I was just like, oh my God. It's
Yeah,
not
you really
because
can.
as an organization, of course they can, but they put this really precious communication with the customer in the hands of someone that they hadn't trained to deal with it. And I just thought, that's a missed opportunity, isn't it? Why ask for my opinion if you don't want it?
Well,
Anyway,
there's a whole...
I digress, but I thought it was quite an interesting...
No, it's a good one. There's a whole tangent there about what is now, I think, slightly pretentiously called zero-party data. But the idea of asking people what they like, and I think, I keep banging this drum about, it's fine to know about what people like, but actually find out what they don't like as well. So a good example, I worked with an outdoor clothing manufacturer who worked on like skiing, sailing, and sort of outdoor camping, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they asked, which one of those you're into? And then we were like, okay, well, are you doing anything with, like, do you change anything as a result of any of that? Because if you're not going to do anything, don't ask. Don't set the expectation. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
The other interesting thing she said was, you must understand Sweaty Betty's the lifestyle brand. Not for me, it isn't. For me, it's a gymwear brand. And this is one of the things that what I do for a living really can deliver to retailers. So if I take, for example, our biggest client right now is Woolworths in Australia. And what we do for Woolworths and for their department store brand and for their grocery brand is we analyse all the patterns in their data and we tell them about their different customers and why they shop with them. So if Sweaty Betty did that, they would absolutely know that I work out. Nobody buys this much gym gear and doesn't go to the gym, And I feel like, therefore, they have their overall market positioning might be lifestyle, but then they make it relevant to the different markets they've got. It's not. This isn't new. This is what I've been doing my whole career. And I find it a little bit frustrating that what we would have, we'd have bitten the hand off back in the 90s to be able to personalize and communicate the way we can now and deliver straight into someone's hand, literally into their hand, the messages. And they just, they don't leverage that in the way they should, because they've now forgotten the ABCs of understanding the data and being relevant to the customer.
Well, that's interesting. Sorry to cut. That is interesting. It ties into one of your. I looked at one of your LinkedIn posts, and you wrote, "I see an increased reliance on recommendation engines and endless one-to-one targeting without actually understanding the asset that is the customer base. Customer behavior is the best barometer of business health and a critical input to drive strategy and growth." So, do you think? And we've talked about this being a bit easier, easier than it used to be with digital media. That do you think that the expansion of marketing technology has helped or hindered brands in terms of getting that value from their customer base? Has it made it almost like too easy to extract surface level stuff so people don't look deeper, for example, or that kind of stuff? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of both because, again, history lesson, but back in the day when we did Tesco Clubcard statements, the first ones, we had 6 offer slots and we had maybe 50 offers and we had to optimize the 50 offers into the 6 slots, which at the time was quite difficult. Now we've got almost infinite things that we can put in front of customers. So it's fabulous that we can do that. But what we're not really doing well is exploiting if you think about all the transactions, not just what you've bought, but also what you've browsed and what you've looked at. If the business was to look at that in a slightly more long-term way, say look over the last 3 months or 6 months and say, actually, that's Rob's DNA. So when he's coming to me today, that's what I already know about him. So he might be buying, ladies' underwear today, but that's a very unusual purchase for him. So it's probably a gift. It's stuff that just doesn't seem to happen. So you then immediately trigger, inappropriate follow-up communication because they're exploiting the technology, which is fabulous, that can do that without feeding in this DNA, if you like, profile behind it.
I mean, there is a great example of that when I was younger, and I'm into heavy metal and hard rock and all that kind of stuff. And my mum wanted a Westlife CD. And
Good example.
and I had to buy it, and I bought it, and it's like, this is going to mess it all up because they're going to think they'll just take the most recent purchase and assume that's what I like, rather than looking back at the history of the other stuff. And I think that kind of talks into a point you made when we were chatting before about product-based recommendations versus customer-level recommendations.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea that actually, when you don't have much data, starting with something that triggers off people who bought this product also bought this probably isn't a bad place to start. No. But once you've got to a customer, enough history on a customer, it becomes more like, okay, well, customers like you, and based on your overall history, bought this kind of stuff. So it moves from the product to the customer.
Exactly right. And I think that if you think about how human beings work, we identify with peer groups, we find common ground with people. And then when we find that common ground, if they say, oh, you're probably going to like that restaurant, or I really enjoyed that film, you go, yeah, well, you're like me, so I'm going to listen to you. And that's all we're trying to do with this approach. We are trying to put that very human ability of saying, put people into groups who've got similar interests, and you'll find that your recommendations hit home more. And obviously, it varies depending on the type of retailer. If you're a food retailer, I mean, I would argue that if you know what someone buys in the supermarket, you can predict almost anything, because it is so insightful about who they are, their lifestyle, you can't help it. You just know a huge amount.
One of the things that's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine, I'd be interested to get your view on it, is I see a lot of stuff around a lot of vendors around things like black box recommendation engines. So plug this in, it'll do the maths for you, and it'll say this product, that product, the other product. I'm not a huge fan of those for 2 reasons. One, I think if you decide you want to change vendor at some point, you're kind of not back to square one, but you've got to redo all that stuff. And then secondly, I like CRM that explains to me why I got it.
Yeah.
Because I think that ties back to the point you were making about really thinking hard when you had to do direct mail about why am I sending you this? Like, why should you care? And I think you lose that if it's vendor based. But I'd be interested to know what you think about those recommendation engines.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of them do a very good job. So if you were to look at some of the streaming video services, like Netflix is the obvious example, usually you can understand why you've been recommended the shows you've been recommended. Usually, and you can, and actually, you're in a world where there is almost infinite amount of content, and you're talking about investing your time, in a new show, and so it's really helpful. And I think but obviously from a customer perspective, then that works. If you then flip it around and think about okay, you're managing content in Netflix, and I've never worked with Netflix, so I'm really off piste here. But and you're thinking about my different audiences and what's my content strategy going forward to deliver to them. You, on top of, again, I'm going to be banging the same drum, on top of your recommendations engine, you have to understand your audiences. So you still shouldn't be moving away from, I mean, the sweet spot is really have great automated tech that does that personalization, but have it within the under the umbrella of, I understand my market, I understand my audiences, my customers, and so on. And that's the best combination. However, they're not often done as well as the likes of Netflix does the recommendations. I mean, I said to you earlier about the Amazon example, and I know we shouldn't really knock Amazon because they're fairly successful, and
Just a bit, yeah.
they can get away with it because of their scale and their pricing and their delivery model and Prime and all of that. So they don't really care that they look stupid, that if you've bought a garden rake, they're going to email you with more garden rakes. We all know they do that, and we just delete it and we self-filter, and but for most brands and most businesses, they need to do better than that, because they need to stand out, because they don't have all of Amazon's attributes that allow them to lead the market. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I think so. I think what's interesting about the Amazon example is at least they tell you why you got it. They'll say you bought this, so even if you go, well, that's not me, at least you kind of go, all right, I get that. The worst ones are ones where they send you something like, what on earth have I done that makes you think I'm going to give a damn about any of that?
Even if they think you're a rake collector,
yeah, maybe so, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's transparent.
Do you think, therefore, that we're maybe losing, because we spend a lot of time talking about data?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a risk that you almost dehumanize?
Yeah.
That data is actually human behavior and is driven by human motivations.
Yeah, I do think there's an interesting thing here, which is that the data work can be quite hard and it can be a little bit dry. It doesn't have to be hard, but we have a little bit of a culture around data. I don't know if it's in lots of Western countries, but certainly in the UK, probably a lot of Western countries, where people are a little bit like, oh, I don't really do maths and it makes me a bit uncomfortable. And I think that can be a bit of a barrier. So we have to really try and turn the data into something that feels like it's telling marketers about their customers. I said to you earlier that we used to have a strapline back in our first business 5.1, which was customers are people too, because we were trying to communicate to marketing teams, when you're looking at this data, try and remember that represents a person who might be like you, or like your brother, or like your mom, or your kids, and try and identify with them and use the data to do that. Because I think there is a real risk that, because marketing teams don't want to immerse themselves in the depth of the insight potentially, I might be generalizing, that they set up lots of triggers and automated actions and very smart tools and they don't think about what that means for the customer, whether that's having the dress that they looked at and didn't buy follow them around for the next 3 days, popping up everywhere.
And I think that's I always talk about what we do in what I do as in CRM and loyalty is you're looking for signals and in the data, and the key then is to interpret that signal correctly.
Yeah.
Like, what does that signal actually mean? If I went on, clicked on something but didn't buy it, does that mean I'm going to do it later, or does it mean I just don't want it? I've discarded that one, and it's about understanding the interpretation of what those signals mean, the motivation behind it. I mean, you've touched on a point about data there that I've worked in lots of businesses with big legacy systems and all that kind of fun and games. What in your experience, what are the most common mistakes you see brands make from a data perspective? Is it data silos? Is it legacy systems? Is it incomplete data? What's the biggest mistakes you see?
I do think data silos is a big issue, and often you've got massive legacy systems, and with lots of. If you think about a big supermarket, for example, and a lot of them are really, really moving forward massively, but you've got, you've got almost this. Certainly used to be, I don't know if it's so much now, the separate team kind of looking at e-commerce. They've got their own more nimble environment. They've got their own data. So, and someone would pop up as an e-commerce customer and they'd be like a new customer. But
Yeah.
I've been shopping with us for 15 years, and those sort of disconnects. I do think that's improving, but there's definitely still some issues around that, and it varies a lot by retailer. And then I think the biggest win and I've probably banged this drum already, but the
Mm.
biggest win most retailers could make is just to be thoughtful about summarizing and pulling in more of that historic data in a way that it can be used at the point of transaction. So I've just bought a coat. What does that mean? How do you put that in the context of my historic purchasing? Is it the first time I bought outerwear with you? Do I buy a coat every winter? Is blah, 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 the usual sort of thing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's not, that's not a difficult thing to do, but it does require the thought,
Absolutely. It's interesting. If you take that dress example, as an example, that it was perfect, but for the timing.
yes,
Right, they whiffed on one thing. They
yeah,
whiffed on the timing being off, and that's probably, as you said, a result of data sets not aligning, not talking to each other, and as a result, just acting on that browsing data. Do you think, therefore, that is it better to do in that situation that they didn't try and tried not to personalize, or is it better that they do? Because at least you'd recognize that. Oh, okay. At least I understand it, even if they did miss on it.
yeah. I mean, I think on balance, it's better to try because something completely irrelevant is doing nothing. That particular example with the dress that I bought for my son's wedding and hadn't worn yet, I was a little bit pissed off, to be honest, because
Yeah.
it was 50% cheaper, and I thought that's completely unnecessary. They didn't have to make me feel a bit rubbish about the dress that I haven't worn
Yeah.
yet for my son's wedding. But that's one of the issues, isn't it? Because the email is cheap, it's automated, it's easy to do. They You could easily say to me, Susan, they didn't know that that was a special dress for your son's wedding, but you have to think about the the fact that you're going into a person's life. I'm overstating it a
Yes,
little bit, but you know what I mean. And there are
I
lots of
do.
examples like this. I mean, we back in the day we used to be incredibly mindful of emailing people about newborn babies, for example, in case everything was okay. And you have to be very thoughtful about life events. And I just wonder if all of the automation, some of that softer skill has been lost.
Yeah,
I don't know.
and the implication there would be that they triggered it off one data source.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas if they'd connected that to transactional data,
They would have
they
known.
wouldn't
Yeah,
they
and
wouldn't
then
have
what they
done
could
that.
have done is, "You bought this fabulous dress. Have you got shoes to go with it yet?"
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I've been knocking around recently is in my head, and with clients is there a tipping point where the amount like I keep reading people's objectives, not objectives, but sort of strategies around. I keep hearing hyper relevancy is a phrase I've heard a lot in the last sort of historically, but in terms of working with clients over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. And there is a question in my head that there is potentially a tipping point past which the amount of effort and time you have to put into making it even more relevant, there's the law of diminishing return sets in. That it becomes more hassle than it's
Yeah.
worth.
I
Am
think
I right there, or do you not buy that?
I think you're probably right when it comes to the sort of targeted marketing kind of use case, if you like. And in fact, I think the eh, sort of ever closer targeting on being precise and hyper personalized increases the risk, because for that point that I just made, which is you don't actually know what else is going on in that person's life. Um, Not necessarily big things, just what else they're buying. However, the investment you make in understanding your customers, I really think that will pay off many times over, because it's a one-time investment, to launch, to align your whole organization around who your customers are, not only today, but who your target customers are, what your objectives are for them. It's a way of measuring your business that is a much more accurate barometer of 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 what's going on than just using sales and profit margin at a top line.
Hmm. Yeah, completely agree.
I know that's a little bit off the topic of what we're talking about, but I think that you mustn't think about understanding your customers as just being about delivering better marketing.
Yeah,
It's about delivering better, period, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the best lessons I ever had was when, and well, in full disclosure, 5-1 with my agency many years ago, over 10 years ago now, which is a terrifying thing to say out loud, but there you go. I'm working on loyalty programs for a video game retailer, and the idea of, I remember there's the effects model, and it was like, okay, well, having a loyalty program allows you to do great marketing, CRM, that's great, but it also allows you to work with suppliers, it also, and generate income and insight there. It also allows you to improve your customer experience customer experience, whether that's online or in store, and how people actually are transacting, and should have when bought with deal be with this or that, or so. Yeah, I think this idea that it is just for marketing isn't right. You're right. It can affect that insight can affect across an entire business and customer experience and all those kind of core points. And you mentioned understanding your customers, and one of the things that people lean to or talk about is segmentation.
Yeah.
And segmenting your customer base. And I have to mention, when we worked together before, we had some great segmentation models, which were fantastic around genres of games people liked and all that kind of stuff. We used that for, especially if there was new IP coming down the pipe, we didn't know we knew kind of what type of game it was, but there wasn't a previous version of it, for example. Or it was fantastic for analytics and understanding how the audience changed over time and all that kind of stuff. But then we didn't use it as much for like specific titles, specific games and those kind of things. So what's your opinion on the value of segmentation? When is you think it's useful, and when is it maybe overrated?
Yeah, I think the segmentation word has been used so much over the years in so many different ways. It's almost become a little bit unhelpful to people like me who specialize in that sort of discipline. So I would say it's behavioural customer segmentation or even behavioural customer modelling. Understanding how customers transact with your business is just fundamental. I can't understand why any board of directors in any retailer wouldn't want to know what the shape of their customer base is and what that means for their strategy. So, and I almost come up against the wall if someone says, I don't understand why you're saying that, because to me it's completely obvious. Why would you not want to understand your customers? I think sometimes the pushback we get as well is, I already understand my customers. And in fact, the best trading director or the best CEO in the world probably does understand their customers quite well. But what you need is alignment across the organization. And we need to know what we're trying to deliver to different customer groups. And what's really interesting about segmentation is it does just put the dollar value or the pound value against different groups of customers. And if we think that we're immune to trends in business because we're more serious than that, then we're really deluded. So many conversations, for example, about Gen Z. I mean, nothing against Gen Z. I have one in my house, but thinking about upcoming trends and new markets is great. It's important, but understanding also that 30% of your sales and 35% of your profit comes from mainstream cross shoppers who buy big brands and have families and sit down to the dinner table every night, and it's a bit dull. But understanding the shape of your business, how many of your customers actually are really motivated thinking about sustainability? It's probably about 15%. Not that it's not important, but just having all of that in perspective, I think is fundamental. But as you can probably tell, I get a little bit evangelical about it. Because once you've understood your customers, and I have to stress, this is not the amount of work it used to be. The first time we did these types of models, it took us 2 years. Now it's really something that you can invest a few weeks in to get this type of insight. Once you've got that, you can add a lens on almost any question. A customer lens on almost any question.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And what do you think are the biggest mistakes people make with segmentation? What are the things that they mess up?
Yeah, well, that is the easiest question for me to answer, because I think the biggest mistake that people make with segmentation is using market research to do it. And I have absolutely no problem with market research. I love market research. It's so useful. But when you actually try to understand your entire customer base and you're sitting on, huge volumes of transactional data, that link to actual customers, you must start with that. Start with how customers behave, how they interact with your business, and then layer research, market data on top. And it's not just because I think it gives you better insight. It's simple that you can measure it. You can go to the
Yeah.
guy who's in charge of the Nintendo Wii back in the day, and you can tell
Yeah.
about his customers, or you can go to the sausage buyer and you can tell her,
Hmm.
these are the people who are buying your products, right down to brand level. If you want, right down to these are the people that buy your products on Saturday night in the store in Chiswick. You've
Yeah. Yeah.
got infinite drillability. So it's very, very important that people use their internal data first.
I mean, I couldn't here.
I
I
know
would
it's
I would say I'm a big believer in that. I think research based segmentation has a place. Maybe you don't have a loyalty program. Maybe you don't have much data. Maybe you're a big FMCG brand and you don't have that kind of level of data, or you're looking at it at an overarching marketing strategy level. And what does the whole market look like? I get it. There's obviously a place for that,
of
but I
course.
think you're absolutely right. If you're trying to understand your own base,
Mm,
start with what they're doing and then figure out why they're doing it.
exactly.
Yeah,
And I have been asked
absolutely.
a few times in my career we've done this market segmentation. We did it with XYZ consulting company. We can't make it connect to how customers shop our business. Can you do that modeling for us? And I used to try, and now I would just say, no, it can't be done.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, what people say and what they do are correlated, but not as strongly correlated as we like to believe. Um,
absolutely agree. Yeah, I've been in that situation as well. It's never
yeah,
fun.
frustrating.
Um, okay, so we've talked about data, we've talked about using insight, we've talked about developing that. Um, the other kind of big thing that I've bumped up against in my career is the idea of culture and how you get this idea of using data and insight instilled into an organization. So whether that's, power dynamics with suppliers or buyers or whatever, people like you've talked about earlier about, well, I know my business, I don't need you telling me what to do and all that kind of stuff. I remember people know here on the Who Listen podcast, I work for Game. We did some work proving that people buy an extra controller, joypad, within 3 months of a console purchase, but very, very rarely at the same time. But we were still trying to do when bought with deals with consoles, bundling consoles and controllers, which didn't make any sense. So how do you culturally try and shift a business to being more data and insight led, and what are the kind of challenges you see in doing that?
Yeah. I mean, if you in an ideal world, if you could possibly do this, you'd get the CEO on his or her own, and you talk to them about it and turn them into believers. Because when they believe, then it makes it a huge difference. I think that the whole culture around data is data is a what's the expression when you have a vein of gold, or what's that expression that we can mine, that
Yeah.
has gained a lot of currency in recent years, so it is easier than it used to be, thankfully. And the fact that you can do the analytics so much faster, so you can start feeding things into the organization more quickly, really helps with the culture. And the other thing that helps is that lots and lots of the insight, they'll go, yeah, I get that. That's sort of what I expected. And so they start to understand that this person's actually talking to me about a business that I recognize. And once you've established that credibility, then you can start to say, well, this is a little bit surprising, isn't it? Or this is something that we can leverage that you didn't think about. I mean, I've come across the biggest fixed views that I still come across nowadays, when you must be very careful never to offend anyone, which is good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing,
Hmm.
but are around age. So it seems that we can still be quite fixed in our views about age in lots of organisations.
Mm.
Um, Getting them to understand, for example, that if you find high fashion customers, or customers who are gym bunnies, that they're very likely to be bimodal. To use the technical term, they'll peak in their 20s, but they'll also peak in their 40s and 50s, when
Yeah.
maybe they've had their families and their focus is back on themselves. So just thinking laterally around that and what the opportunities are. So those are really interesting conversations to have.
I think so. We used to have a saying when I was at DDB in Australia. It was the most infuriating thing is when somebody thinks that their personal anecdote overrides the data and analytics that you've done? You know, my personal, well, yeah, that may be, but my daughter tried this and did that, so I don't. I'm like, oh, for God's sake,
Yeah,
you know, that's always a fun one to try and deal with.
yeah.
Um,
I had quite a fun one in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, actually, because the client had said, "Would you mind looking up some of the colleagues' segments that you've developed from their loyalty cards? So that will help them gain credibility." So that was all fine, except for one lady, and she was flip flopping from a premium segment into a more ready meal segment, back into premium segment. So in the meeting, I just was honest and said, "I don't understand why you're flip flopping." And she said, I think that's because my ex-husband still has his loyalty card linked to my loyalty card.
oh my
And
God,
it actually really reinforced the credibility of the analytics, because even this flip-flopping from the two households had been picked up. So that was quite a funny one.
that's
That's a new
amazing.
one. Yeah.
And you talk. It's funny. You've talked in this interview about the, and I've come across this before, the idea that a lot of marketers, even people who are, you know, CRM people, don't want to get involved in numbers and in data, whether that's analytics or that's even things like understanding statistical significance and testing and all that kind of good stuff. So what skills do you think are missing, whether that's within CRM teams or more broadly at the moment? Where if you could, you know, turn a few lights on in terms of people's brains, where would those lights be going on?
Yeah, I think the first one around data is definitely still a challenge, and I think that maybe if we could close. We used to talk a lot about closing loop and measuring things well, and I think sometimes marketing teams are just running so fast to keep producing the marketing material, and they never have time. And to be fair, they don't have the time or resource to press pause and to see what's actually working. And I think if
Mm.
there's a little bit more rigor around that, maybe their boss is asking them not just about click-through rates and conversion rates, but actually closing that loop and, into customers actually becoming more high-value customers. That'd be interesting. I think
Hmm.
the other one that I have observed is I think people should get out more. And I think that because, especially since the pandemic and everyone's at their desk and they may be working at home, I used to always encourage all my team members back in the day, to get out into client stores. I mean, I worked for many years with lots of different retailers. I would never go to a meeting if I wasn't a customer of theirs, just like never.
Mm.
Just apart from maybe Chloe, because they were a little expensive for me. But apart from them, but I did do some browsing in their stores. But yeah, but by and large, you would never go and not have been in a store or been online and transacted with that organization.
Yeah.
You talk to CRM teams. I used to run workshops a lot, and I would say, I want you to spend the next. We talk about your customers. I now want you to take that customer segment and go on your competitor's website and see what would they buy from them. And it was a really great exercise. Oh, I think our jeans offer's better for them, or whatever.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that just take a beat and think about these customers as people.
I think that's absolutely right. I think, and especially from CRM perspective, because you spend so much time looking at, we talked about this earlier about dehumanizing people, and you think about data as, you think about people as segments or as blocks on a
Yeah,
spreadsheet or, you know, a model score or whatever it is. I think you're right. The best thing I did working on a camera brand recently was going to the photography club near where I live. So a friend of mine who's heavily into photography and said, "Can I come along and ask a few questions and just see what X and Y?" Amazing insight.
yeah,
Amazing insight into who goes to those things, why they do it, and was so valuable when talking back to the client and all those kind of things. So I completely agree with you about my better half calls them retail safari
yeah.
is
That's
her phrase, which I love.
And the other thing, of course, and I hope you don't think I was being disparaging about market research earlier. It was a particular type of research, because I
Yeah.
absolutely love a focus group. So when you have different customer behaviors, and I seem to remember one of the focus groups we did back in the day, where
Mhm.
one of the segments turned up and someone was dressed as a pirate and someone else was, and these people had,
Yeah,
so much to tell us, helped
absolutely.
us understand the behaviors that we were seeing. So, um,
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think to me, market research is at its strongest when it's asking, why did you do something?
Exactly.
So now that's a bit of post-rationalization and all that kind of stuff. But we did a lot of work working on, like, okay, you don't trade in video games with us. Why don't you trade in video games? We know you don't, because we've seen it in the data, and that's how and I think that was super enlightening. I think you're right about where research fits in there.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up, but we're going to wrap it up with a final question. So the Everybody Hates Your Brand Room 101 has been going for a while now. We've had lots of different entries into the room, and I ask every interviewee comes on, if you could put one thing into the Everybody Hates Your Brand Marketing Room 101 to reside in purgatory for all time, what would it be and why?
Well, for me, it's absolutely definitely the pop-ups that you get as soon as you go onto a new website, and they pop up and say, give us your email and you can have 10% off. And you literally have not been able to even see what they sell, whether they're your size, whether you like them. And I think they're completely pointless and frustrating. So I'd like to put them in room 101.
That's absolutely fair, because the bit that really annoys me is that offer never comes back round again.
No.
So, like, you'll go to buy something and put, all right, fine, if I do, and come back around, and the offer's gone. You don't see it again. Like, it's not built into the rest of the customer experience. It drives me up the wall. So yes, that one will definitely go into the Everybody Hates Your Brand Room 101. Well, look, thank you, Susan. It's been fantastic to have you on. Thank you for spending the time and coming on.
Thank you very much. It's been fabulous to talk to you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Some great thoughts, some tidbits, some great anecdotes, and some experiences from Susan there. Once again, we thank her for coming on. Stay tuned for our next podcast, which will unbelievably be our 50th episode. And we're going to celebrate this milestone with a fabulous returning guest. So, like I say, stay tuned. And until then, as my mum always says, take great care and be vigilant out there.